This is a Gakken toy record maker from 2020.
And this is a wilcox-gay recordette from 1949.
This one just arrived in the mail.
And this one I got for Dave about 10 years ago.
I'd been complaining about how there was no way to make vinyl records at home.
So I did some research and discovered these portable record cutters existed. I ended up buying this for his birthday.
We spent many afternoons trying to get it to work.
It's designed to cut into special record blanks that they unfortunately stopped making in the 50s.
They're made of aluminum, which has been covered over with lacquer.
Over the years, we ordered a bunch off eBay, but all the recordings we made with them were really terrible.
And not terrible in a cool, lo-fi kind of way, just terrible. Our theory was always that the blanks we had dried up and hardened over time. Of course, back then, it was nearly impossible to get new record blanks. We looked everywhere, and once we ran out of blanks, we started trying to record on picnic plates and blank CDs, but the results were never great. All of which is why I'm pretty excited about this record cutter from Gakken. Of course, when it arrived, it didn't look like this. In fact, let's do a quick unboxing. In the box, there's this beautiful, glossy magazine which features interviews and articles. There's a profile of Mark Mothersbaugh and one of Yuri Suzuki, who is the artist and designer responsible for this little kit. Also in the box are blank records and labels to stick on those records. And finally, the main part of the box contains the many, many parts that make up the kit. I turned to the back of the magazine, but quickly discovered that the instructions are all in Japanese, and some of those words look very important. I searched Google for English instructions and am relieved to find a version of this guide in English. Building this thing is really fun. I would describe it as an intermediate build, only because there are a lot of small parts and you have to be pretty careful. It took me just over an hour. Okay, so I've just read over the instructions, and I think we're finally ready to give this thing a spin. I'm going to plug it into USB power, and I'm also going to hook the input up from my iPhone so that I can play some music into it. Next, I'm going to take one of the blank records and put it on the platter. This adapter that I'm screwing on should help keep the record in place during cutting. Next, I move the record arm into place. Okay, I've turned it on. The platter is spinning. We're going to do a quick audio test. To test it out, I wrote a little piece of music. It's not much. It's a little fragment of a song, but it should be enough to hear how the sound is being reproduced. If I hit play on the iPhone, what you're hearing is actually the needle vibrating. It's a good sign anyway. Okay, so time to do a test cut. I'm going to lower the cutting arm onto the surface of the record. And now I'm going to hit play on the iPhone. While this record is cutting, seems like a good time to talk about how records work in the first place. Let's start with the obvious stuff. Records are, of course, round discs for storing sound. They're covered with tiny, microscopic grooves. Record players play back records using a special needle, sometimes called a stylus.
Good morning, Mr. Hansen.
God morgen, Herr Hansen.
As the record spins, the needle on the tone arm gets dragged through the grooves of the record, and anything that needle encounters on its way through that groove will cause it to vibrate. It could be a piece of dust, it could be music, anything, doesn't matter.
How is your son?
Hvordan står det til med deres sønn?
And the needle is hooked up to an amplifier, which in turn is hooked up to the speakers. So it's actually pretty simple. So let's come back to our cutter. In the beginning, the surface of the blank record is smooth. It's just a flat, round piece of plastic. As the record spins, the cutting needle drags across the record, carving a tiny groove in the plastic. Since the needle's actually digging a microscopic trench, some material is being removed in the process. That excess plastic comes off the surface of the record as tiny threads, which are called swarf, and it builds up really fast. Professional record cutters have systems for actually dealing with swarf, but we have to just kind of try to remove it with our hands if we can. Okay, our record is cut. Let's give it a spin. Okay, it doesn't work. The playback needle just can't stay in the grooves at all. Luckily, I think I know what the problem is. The test piece I wrote is very bassy. The more bass frequencies there are in the source material, the wider the resulting groove will be. If it's too wide, it can actually overrun into the next groove, making the record effectively unplayable. Of course, this problem was discovered a long time ago when records were first being commercialized, and the solution that the Recording Industry of America came up with was to use filters to take the bass out of a record before it gets cut. And record players, the things people actually use to listen to records, are designed to reverse this. They boost the bass when the record gets played back. So we need to remove the bass from our song. In comes Teenage Engineering to the rescue. So last year, Teenage Engineering re-released this same Gakken kit. Their version is called the PO-80 Record Factory. Except for the color scheme, it's identical to this one. When they released it, they also created this handy mastering page. It's very simple. You just upload your tracks to it, and it applies a curve to take out most of the bass. I just ran my test track through it and did a new cut. Let's hear how it sounds. Wow, that is really noisy. Still, it's amazing that it works at all. For what it's worth, this is about as good a recording as we were ever able to get with a Wilcox-gay. So you may be wondering why this doesn't sound like a commercial record. Commercial records, the kind you see in a record store, are pressed in factories. And what that factory is doing is essentially making thousands of copies of an original record, which is called a master record. You've probably heard the term mastering engineer. Well, back in the day, that's what a mastering engineer was. They would use an expensive machine called a record lathe and cut the sound onto an acetate blank. And that was the so-called master record that could then be copied in a factory. Being able to do that well is an extremely specialized set of skills. There's a wonderful video by one of the mastering engineers at Abbey Road where he explains that entire process and how it changed over the years. I'll include a link in the description to this video. It's really fascinating. Of course, neither of the record cutters I have are professional record lathes. They were both made for consumers. The idea behind the wilcox-gay was that families would gather around the device, pop on a Recordio brand recording disc, sold separately, and record basically what amounted to an audio postcard. If you look on eBay, you can sometimes find these recordings made by private individuals. Most of them have people singing or talking about their lives. Here's one I bought a while ago.
Well, what I'm going to do now is let this record run out, and I think I'm going to sell this record for $1.35.
By the way, this is a little sobering to admit, but I have never come close to making a recording even this clear on any record cutter I've owned.
So $1.35 a piece, and I'm quite sure I'm going to make some money off these records.
Anyway, back to our record cutter. I wonder if there isn't some other use for this thing. Part of my frustration, I think, stems from the fact that I'm trying to reproduce sound. In other words, I already know what this song is supposed to sound like, and this ain't it. Let's try a different approach. Let's try to use this thing to generate sound. It's hard to be disappointed in a sound when you have no expectations for what it should sound like in the first place. I've put together a wave file that just contains a bunch of sine waves and square waves and sawtooth waves. I'm going to cut a record containing those waveforms, and then I'm going to listen back, and maybe we can make a sample library out of it. So the test wave record is done, and here is what those waveforms sound like when played back. Yeah, really warbly. I've taken them and turned them into a series of sample libraries for Decent Sampler. I actually really love how this sounds. All the flaws that make this thing just terrible at reproducing sound are actually an asset when using it for sound design. All in all, this thing has been really fun. Most people take it as fact that records are not something that can be made at home. And for the most part, that's definitely still true. I definitely think Gakken was on the right track when they marketed this as a toy. Still, even though the sound quality is laughable, it's really cool that it works at all. If you enjoyed this video, it'd be great if you could hit like. And if you haven't done so already, now is a great time to subscribe. It's free and you'll be notified whenever I make one of these videos. The sample library I made in this video is free for everyone. There's a link in the description to this video. Enjoy!